Hi, everybody. Brad Truax here from Eastman's Woodlands and Wildlife Committee. Today, we're going to talk about porcupines, which I like to refer to as the mystery mammal. There's a porcupine. The porcupine is the second largest rodent in North America, the beaver being the largest. And porcupines can weigh up to 35 pounds, though most of them are less than 20 pounds. They have over 30,000 barbed quills. These are made of keratin, which is the same material your nails are made of. And each of these quills is 1 to 4 inches long. The quills detach very easily when they're touched. Porcupines can't actually shoot their quills, but don't tell that to a dog that's been quilled. Rather, they raise them and they can slap them at an animal or human that gets too close to them. And they can swing their muscular tails around like a mace. They also emit a pungent odor that's used as a defensive tool. They're very slow moving, but they're excellent climbers and excellent swimmers. They're nearsighted, but they have a strong sense of smell. So, what happens after a porcupine slaps its quills at a dog or other animal? Well, the quills will grow back. They grow back at about a millimeter every 2 days. And porcupines also shed their quills. New ones begin developing within a few days after the old ones are shed or removed. You'd be lucky to actually see a porcupine. They're very shy and they're primarily nocturnal, so we seldom actually see them. They spend much of their time in trees or in their dens, and you're actually much more likely to see them as roadkill. But if you're walking through the woods, don't forget to look up. Would you have spotted this porcupine in this tree? Look at that, barely visible. So if we seldom see them, how do we know that they're out there? Basically by the sign or the clues that they leave. There are scat piles outside a den, which I'll show you in a minute. Hemlock twigs on the ground. Hemlock is one of their favorite foods, and they'll often leave twigs on the ground. Bark removed from trees, which are very characteristic. And they have very characteristic tracks and track patterns. Uh, Porcupines are fertile just 1 day a year and only for 8 to 12 hours. That must be some sort of record. And porcupines usually don't make much sound, but when they're mating, they make lots of sounds, which we'll talk about in a minute. The gestation averages about 210 days, and they usually give rise to a single offspring called a porcupet. Porcupets are born with soft quills, but they begin to harden within a couple days. We've never heard porcupines vocalizing, but that's probably because we seldom see them. People who care for porcupines in zoos or biologists who study porcupines in the wild describe them as incredibly vocal animals. They can cough, shriek, whistle like a bird, make funny kazoo-like noises, chatter their teeth, and grunt. What do porcupines eat? They are pure herbivores. They eat needles and barks from evergreen trees in winter, and in the warmer months, they eat berries, seeds, grasses, flowers, and leaves. They can swim into ponds to eat water lilies. In the fall, they prefer acorns, hickory nuts, and beech nuts, much like many of the other wildlife we see in the forest. Hemlock buds and branches are a real favorite of the porcupines, and they often remove the outer bark of trees in order to get at the more nutritious underlying soft bark. And they often gnaw on bones or antlers that they find in the forest in order to get calcium and minerals from those sources. And sometimes they've been known to chew on wooden axe handles or canoe paddles on people's property. And they love eating plywood. Porcupines crave salt. That's why we often see them at roadsides where they can feed on road salt. And they probably chew on the wooden axe handles or canoe paddles because of the salt that's left behind from human sweat. Porcupines usually feed on trees. This is a porcupine gnawing on a tree. Trees are their prime food source in winter, and they often remove the outer bark so they can get at that more nutritious underlying soft bark. Hemlocks, as we mentioned, and other evergreens are a favorite of theirs. The average lifespan of a porcupine is 5 to 7 years, but some have been known to live as old as 32 years. Porcupine tracks are very characteristic, and that's because they have 4 toes on the front feet and 5 toes on the hind feet. That plus the track that's left by their tail leaves a very characteristic track pattern. So the illustration would look something like this. You have the feet tracks and then the trail. So again, watch this porcupine walk, and it helps you picture what the tracks would look like that he leaves behind. And see how the tail would likely leave an imprint in the snow or sand or mud. So there is kind of a waddling gait. You can see that tail slapping up and down. And again, you can picture what that track pattern would look like. And again, those tracks are characterized again by 4 toes on the front feet, 5 toes on the hind feet. And note the imprint left back here by the tail in this photo of track pattern of a porcupine in the sand. Here's porcupine tracks in the snow, and you can make out the track that's left by the tail right in through here. Porcupines actually don't like deep snow because they have such very short legs. Porcupine scat is very characteristic. And remember, we've often said that the location of scat is a clue to who left it. Well, porcupines live in dens that are often found in a cave, a rock crevice, or a hollow tree like this one. And again, the hallmark of the porcupine den is the presence of scat outside the entrance. And once the snow starts in winters, porcupines usually come just outside the den to defecate, then go back in. And this often leads to large piles of scat outside the den. Porcupines feed on trees, and the damage is often on branches high up in a tree. Here you can see they've eaten the bark way on these major branches high up in the tree, but they may also eat the bark on any branches or on the trunk. And they just chew down to the cambium and leave behind very shallow marks or grooves where their insiders scrape against the wood. And this is showing a tree that a porcupine has eaten the bark away and actually gotten down to more nutritious areas. This is another one where they almost totally denuded the bottom part of this tree. Again, porcupines live in dens that could be, again, in a hollow tree like we saw, but also in a cave or a rock crevice. And they usually are solitary and live one to a den. But given the right circumstances, multiple porcupines may occupy a site. In fact, in Allegheny State Park in Western New York, multiple porcupines took over an old abandoned sawmill, and they were found there feasting on treated wood. They don't hibernate in winter, but they usually stay in their dens in the very cold or stormy weather. And because they have those very short legs, they don't navigate very well in the deep snow. This is showing a porcupine den in a cave or a rock crevice. And again, you might see a few quills outside the den. And porcupines usually, again, are solitary and live one to a den. And you might see signs of what they eat, either some hemlock twigs or some popped open acorns just outside the den. But again, the characteristic or hallmark of a porcupine den is the presence of scat. So again, this again is a porcupine den in a hollow tree, and they're very large piles of scat outside. These are unmistakable signs of porcupines. And once the snow starts, the porcupines usually come just outside the den to defecate, resulting in these very large piles of scat. Porcupines are active all winter long, but they often stay in their dens when it's very cold or stormy. And because they have those very short legs, they don't navigate well in the deep snow. And they mostly eat bark and branches in winter, which really is of fairly limited nutritional value. So they have to lose, they might lose up to a third of their weight during the winter. Predators of the porcupine, the primary predator is the fisher. Fishers are one of the few predators of the porcupine. So porcupines and fisher populations are inversely related. This is actually a painting. It shows a porcupine up in a tree and a fisher down here on the ground looking at that porcupine. Uh, Again, fishers are the primary predators of the porcupine. Some other predators might be cougars, bobcats, coyotes, and wolverines. But here in New Hampshire, fishers are the primary predator. And fishers attack the belly of the porcupine, so they avoid the quills as much as possible. And there's some ecological importance to this. If you don't have fishers in an area, you may get an overpopulation of porcupines. And in turn, the porcupines overbrowse tender new growth and they chew bark away on more mature trees. And that harms the trees and can lead to a decline in the health of the forest over time. There are other threats to the porcupine. As we mentioned, they rely heavily on hemlock forests. And as the hemlock woolly adelgid threatens hemlocks in New England, this important food source is in jeopardy. But some porcupines have also died when they go out too far on a limb and end up falling out of a tree. They actually die from the trauma of falling out of the tree. But the porcupine's worst enemy, the automobile. They often come to the side of highways to feed on the road salt, and that's why we most often see them as roadkill. Ouch! This is a dog that got quilled by a porcupine. So what do you do if your dog gets quilled? If you or your dog gets quilled, you need to seek medical attention immediately. The quills absorb water and body heat, and they actually expand and they work their way deeper into the skin. And they have these microscopic barbs on them that further damage the skin if you just try to pull them straight out. The skin can become infected. So some have recommended you snip the ends of the hollow quills to relieve some of the built up pressure, but then it may actually make it more difficult to remove them totally. And though some say you can remove the quills from a human or a dog yourself, we recommend that you see a medical professional for yourself or a veterinarian for your dog. Proper cleaning after removal is important, and a topical antibiotic may be recommended after removal of the quills. So, what good are porcupines? You may be asking yourself this question. They do impact the ecology in good ways as well as bad ways. They're an important part of the food chain, both as an herbivore and as a prey species. And their foraging or behavior transport food and nutrients from the tree canopies to the forest floor, either by way of drop branches or large volumes of scat. So some people say we should think of them as tree pruners. We think of them as a mystery species. So again, that's all about porcupines, which we consider to be primarily a mystery species.